Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. I have hit the wildcard button for game week 32. So in today's video, I'll be running through the different strategies I was considering, why I ended up feeling that the wildcard was best for my team, and of course, have a look at my wildcard draft so far ahead of game week 32. Welcome back everyone to another video. Now today, of course, I'm here to present to you my current wildcard draft, but what I should say right at the start is it is far from locked at the moment, and I think one of the key frustrations I'm having is I'm playing around with my wildcard, but I'm finding it really difficult to differentiate without feeling like I'm forcing myself to. So what we're going to do in this video is have a look at the current draft. As we run through that, I'm going to have a look at some key positions where I'm looking between 2 or 3 different players. We'll discuss that. And then towards the end of the video, I'm going to take us over to FPL.team and start doing a bit of a live manipulation of the draft to see where we might be able to do something a little bit different, a little bit more exciting that might give us something a little bit more powerful to go against the crowd ahead of the last few game weeks of the season. I'll also, of course, explain why I chose to personally wildcard with my team in this video, whereas with your team, it might not be necessary. So although this will be a popular strategy, I think what I've seen out there in the community this week suggests to me at least that actually this isn't going to be the overwhelming majority of managers on a wildcard anymore. And I'm hopeful that just having this team is going to be a differential in itself, because not everyone is looking at this strategy anymore. So if you're like me and you're looking at wildcarding and you're thinking, it's a bit boring, it kind of picks itself, I agree, it does, and I completely sympathize with that. But just remember and have a look around the community, because there are a lot of managers that are going away from this strategy now. So a lot of these picks are not going to be very high effective ownership. Now, the other strategies are also very good. So we'll have a look at what I could have done as an alternative strategy later on in the video. But for now, let's start off by talking about the goalkeepers and the defense. Starting off with the goalkeepers, Verbruggen kind of picks himself. One of those almost auto includes. Brighton have been actually pretty solid defensively recently, so I want a bit of coverage there. He's cheap, has Burnley in game week 32, and then of course has a half decent double afterwards, and doesn't have a bad set of fixtures to end the season with as well. And it works quite neatly with a Leeds player. So Darlow is the current starting goalkeeper for Leeds right now. I'm a little bit worried that there's the possibility that Perry comes back in at some point. But Darlow's played, I think it is 9 league games on the bounce, and I think it's his spot to lose. Now, Leeds haven't been that bad defensively either, so I don't see any reason to suggest that he would get dropped. But if I was being ultra cautious, I could just put Dubravka in this position, who will have a double game week in 33. The reason I'm not doing that at the moment is because I do think Darlow starts both in the double and then probably continues for the rest of the season. And Dubravka's just in a much worse defence, whereas Darlow could keep a clean sheet or 2 in the next few game weeks. So that's why it's Darlow and Verbruggen. They rotate quite nicely for the remainder of the season as well. That feels relatively locked, with the slight asterisk on Darlow that if I get a bit worried about him maybe getting rested or dropped even, then Dubravka might come in. Into the defence, I think this is probably the weak point on a wildcard. I discussed it earlier on this week. It does look worse than the team I'm wildcarding away from, which we'll come on to later in the video. But the one thing I would say is it does set you up very nicely for a bench boost if you've still got that chip left. So there are 4 double game week players out of this back 5. The one that's slightly different is Gabriel. Obviously, he's playing in the best defense in the league and is the best defender FPL-wise so far this season. I think he's still got the highest points per game out of all FPL players across all positions. So basically, if I don't include him on a wildcard, I will want to plan to get him back as quickly as possible after the bench boost. But I don't have many free transfers. In fact, I've only got one, and mapping ahead, as we will do later on in this video, I'd be a little bit concerned about booking in all of these transfers to get back to Gabriel, maybe some Crystal Palace players as well. because if anything goes wrong, then all of a sudden I'm using a free transfer ahead of bench boost 33 because I need to make sure that I've got a full 15. I can't have any injuries sat on my bench that week. So that spare transfer might be a necessity this time next week. So Gabriel is in for me at the moment, just saves me a transfer down the line. Good home fixture this week, or at least a decent one, and then good fixtures after free hit 34 is out the way as well. The other four, I think it's important to have at least one of the Bournemouth centre-backs, either Hill or Senesi. My team value is not great, so I've got Hill in there. You could look at having both, and Gabriel versus Senesi is probably the first big 50-50 call I've got, whether I go with Gabriel as I described, or maybe put in Senesi for a couple of game weeks. Worst fixture this week, and I might not even start either of the Bournemouth defenders if I went with the pair of them. Maybe Strauch could come in as the third defender in game week 32 away at Man United. It's not great, but it does mean I've got an extra double game weeker in 33, and both Hill and Senesi are very, very good on the DEFCONs. So you can only imagine they're likely to pick them up in both of the double game week fixtures. That gives them a really, really high floor. So I am tempted to go with Senesi, but I think longer term, Gabriel is ever so slightly still the play because I don't have many free transfers. But we'll come on to that later with the planning. The other three positions we haven't talked about much. The Leeds defender I'm going with currently is Strauch. Decent on the DEFCONs, seemed absolutely nailed for 90 minutes so far this season. I'd be tempted to go with Bijol, but I'm a little less confident on the minutes going forwards. And there are 1 or 2 weeks where I would want to play that Leeds defender after game week 33. So Strauch at 4.3 million seems like kind of the safer of the options. If I really needed to save some money, I'd go with Bijol and risk it, but Strauch's in for now. Van Hecke, again, feels like a bit of a wallpaper pick. Very obviously the best Brighton defender to be going with. And I currently have that double up defensively of Verbruggen and Van Hecke on a defence that at times can be quite frustrating. So that's one I need to consider. And there are different combinations where maybe I just go with single Brighton. But they've got some good fixtures. Burnley this week really helps me out on the wildcard as well. And Van Hecke has been a phenomenal centre-back this season. Not bad on the DEFCONs. Little bit of attacking threat from set pieces. And he's cheap. So simple enough on him. And then finally, you've got O'Reilly. I have considered, and I will continue to consider, looking at Guéhi or Nunez. But I just don't know why I'm doing it, to be honest. I keep coming back to the idea that, well, I need to differentiate somewhere. Maybe I could pick a different Man City defender, but O'Reilly just feels like the best of the three. He feels pretty nailed at the moment, has played in the centre of midfield, and even if he isn't, is still getting into the box. He's got great underlying XG data, in fact, comparable to the likes of Jared Bowen, for example, almost identical XG data to him this season. And he's pretty cheap. So I just don't see any reason to overcomplicate it. If you wanted to go double Man City defence, possibly Guéhi or Nunez alongside O'Reilly. But for me, O'Reilly right now does feel like a pretty obvious Man City pick. Okay, so moving into the midfield, and we probably won't take too long on this section because 4 out of the 5 of these feel pretty nailed. And I don't think I've seen many wildcard drafts without them, but for good reason. And again, I would love to sit here and say I've found 5 amazing differential players that are completely off the grid at the moment, but I would say at least 3 of these I'd be very surprised to see in the majority of wildcards for very good reason. Bruno Fernandes, yes, he's got a single game week in 33. Could you be tempted to maybe look elsewhere and bet against him for a couple of game weeks? Absolutely. But I think the deciding factor here for me is he is in the form of his career at the moment. He's playing Leeds at home this week and is probably the standout captain. And if I wildcard this week without Bruno Fernandes, it feels like the damage that could be done in game week 32 itself might be too much to make up for, because already this doesn't look great in 32. So I do at least want the best captain to cover me off in game week 32 itself. I think Bruno Fernandes, even on game week 33 itself, on the bench boost, is still a very reasonable player to be bench boosting with, considering it's Chelsea away. Not a great fixture, but again, Bruno Fernandes isn't your average bench player. He's one of, if not the best player in the game right now. So he stays on my wildcard. He's got penalties. He's got great attacking data. I think he's double-digit hauled 5 times in a row at home now. So he's sticking around. Cole Palmer, very similar in the sense that I can't really see a reasonable alternative in that Chelsea midfield right now. If this wildcard was a bit tighter on money, let's say West Ham got through the FA Cup instead of Leeds, they've got a few more expensive picks. I think Palmer might have been the sacrifice because he is quite expensive. He hasn't been good value for money this season, but he is back fully fit again. He's already come out recently and said, well, at least I am fully fit. I can shoot properly again. I'm back to my peak. And he's got the double game week in game week 33. And unfortunately, it probably is that simple at this moment. If you think he's going to get good minutes, he's on penalties, he's got good underlying attacking data. All of the other Chelsea midfielders just feel like slightly worse options than Cole Palmer. Now, if Enzo Fernandez wasn't banned internally for game week 32 and money was a bit tight, you could look at him instead. But there's risk attached to that because he is banned in game week 32 and then 33. Chelsea are currently saying that he'll be back in the fold for that game. But if he comes out and says something else against the manager, they might continue to suspend him and hold him back. So I think it's Cole Palmer for me. Then you've got the Man City midfielder, which is, for me, Semenyo. Again, pretty obvious pickup on a wild card, but he's been in sensational form all season. And going against him now, would you go for Cherky? Yeah, possibly. That he's obviously a phenomenal player. I really like watching him, but his minutes are up and down all the time. Can you guarantee he plays twice in the double game week? Absolutely not. Then you look at someone like Rodri as like the next most nailed Man City midfielder you could pick. He's decent on DEFCON, but low attacking threat. And if you're really asking whether Rodri or Semenyo is the better option, it just is Semenyo at the moment. So again, it just feels like forcing it a little bit to think differently there. As much as I would love to, that combination of three players specifically does feel very boring to me. But I still think it is the most likely ones to be picking up the most points across the next few game weeks if you're on this strategy. Now, a lot of people aren't on this strategy. And what I'm hoping is that, especially with Palmer, less so Semenyo and Fernandez, but that enough people are not wildcarding this week that Palmer's effective ownership actually overall isn't going to be that high. It will grow. It will be relatively high come game week 33 when he doubles. But I do still feel like because there's that diversion of routes, that those different pathways that people are following, players like Palmer, the Brighton midfielder will come onto, and maybe Tavernier as well, won't necessarily be really high ownership players. They'll be very well owned on a wild card for anyone who is wildcarding. But I think that overall section of the player base is a bit smaller than it might have otherwise been. So I'm hoping it's still enough to gain from him. Then you come over to the two that are maybe slightly less nailed. Tavernier has penalty share. He's still very cheap and he's got good underlying XG data. He's been very frustrating recently for those who have owned him. But again, Bournemouth have a reasonable double game week and he's a very good budget enabler. And I come back to the same question. If you're not picking him as a Bournemouth midfielder, maybe Ryan, he's a reasonable option. He's got decent underlying data, but you're losing the penalty share. You're losing the set pieces. Tavernier feels a little bit more nailed than Ryan at the moment as well. And then maybe you look at Alex Scott, but he's got very low attacking data. He's decent on the DEFCON, but that is about it. I'd prefer to shoot for the stars with the upside potential of Tavernier, who could get a brace in either of the fixtures and pay it all off all at once. So those are 4 out of the 5. The 5th is very up for debate at the moment. I've got Gross in there at the moment, but I'll flash 5 up on screen now. 3 Brighton options, including Gross, but also Hinchelwood at 5.1 million, I think he is now, and has been a box crashing 10 in the last few game weeks for Brighton. The minutes aren't perfect, but the way he's been playing, you've got to think that he gets at least the next game as a starter against Burnley. And then unless he plays poorly, I think it's his spot to lose. So I could look at Hinchelwood. I do quite like that as an option. Very, very close between those two. Then you've got someone like Mitoma, who with this current setup, I actually can't afford. I'd have to maybe downgrade Gabriel to Senesi, but then I could have Mitoma, and he's been favoured by Hertzler on the whole, and the recent sketchy minutes have mainly been around injury doubts. The problem is he's not in the best form either. So if I'm going with Mitoma, I have to be really confident that he is significantly better than his cheaper teammates, Hinchelwood and Gross. And I'm not sure I can confidently predict that at the moment, but it is in the debate. Then you've got a single game weaker in 33 like Ismail Assar, who, okay, doesn't have the double now, but is very likely to in game week 36. So that would be saving a transfer down the line. He's got penalties or had penalties very recently. I can't remember if Strand Larsen might get ahead of him in the pecking order, but I'm pretty sure Sar's still got the share. And then Mateta might be coming back soon. He might get the penalties back off of him. Even without that, though, he's still putting up really good underlying attacking data. So Sar's an option that could save me a transfer later on down the line. I don't think I need to overcomplicate it there and pick him, and one less double game weaker is never a good thing. Then you've got Jayden Anthony as the final option. I think he's been a bit overlooked here. He's cheap. He got off to a perfect start to the season. He's tailed off a little bit since, but his minutes have remained strong. His underlying attacking data isn't awful. And if Burnley score a goal or two in the double game week, I think he's as likely as anyone to be at the end of that. I think he could be a nice little differential that I am considering. And I think people are just generally overlooking the Burnley options for good reason. They're not a good team by any means, but there are players within that Burnley side that could, in a double game week, maybe bag a goal or two if you're lucky. Anthony could be one of those players, and he does seem a little bit more exciting than Gross, who I've currently got in my 11. Now, Anthony is more of a traditional winger. Gross is more of a, not quite a defensive midfielder, probably more like a box-to-box midfielder. But I think out of the two right now, Gross is slightly winning it because Brighton are just fundamentally a better side. But don't rule out Jayden Anthony either. He could be interesting. Right then, so into my forward line. I really won't be wasting too much time on this one. Erling Haaland is back in, and that is another reason why I chose to wildcard this week, because I actually sold him a few weeks ago, and bringing him back ahead of a double game week and then another one later on in the season just seemed like the sensible play. So wildcard is not totally because of that, but it's another factor as to why I pressed the button. I actually think the Chelsea game is going to be pretty high scoring, and a weakness on this wildcard is that I will probably be starting 5 players in that fixture between Man City and Chelsea in game week 32. I might be wrong, and it could be famous last words, but my gut feeling is that that could be quite a high-scoring game. So Haaland, Semenyo, Palmer, Pedro, all options that I think have a reasonable opportunity to return in game week 32, and then they all double in game week 33. Haaland will undoubtedly be my captain in 33 as well. I did very briefly look at a draft where maybe if I removed Erling Haaland and locked him out, what could I do with the money? The problem is, I've got all of the most expensive good players in this draft anyway that are doubling in game week 33. So if you take out Erling Haaland, you're basically just downgrading that position and not using the money elsewhere. It's actually quite tough to spend the money on other double game weekers. So for that reason, even though he's not been in the best form until that Liverpool game where he, of course, came back with a hat-trick, I think he just has to stay. Pedro as well, quite similar. He's cheap enough to make it worthwhile. He's been in great form recently with Chelsea, a couple of poor game weeks in a row, but I still have enough faith in him that he will be worth it for a double game week forward. Outside of that, I think that final spot is a bit of a three-way tie between Calvert-Lewin, Welbeck, and maybe Fleming as well, a bit like Jayden Anthony. Fleming's not been in bad form at all recently. His underlying attacking data is actually not that bad for a Burnley striker. So I would consider Fleming. Calvert-Lewin is currently in the lead for me because he's got penalties, the minutes look pretty secure, and Leeds have a good double game week and good fixtures later on in the season, and transfers are going to be precious. I'm going to want to hold this forward for as long as I can. So Calvert-Lewin wins for that reason. Is he a favoured pick by the FPL community? No. Everyone kind of has bad memories with him, and he's been frustrating even this season at times. But he does look fully fit again. He is on penalties, and the data's not that bad. And Leeds do create quite a few chances for him. So I think he's in the lead for me. Welbeck is definitely in my thinking, and the matchups in game week 33 are actually really good for him in terms of chances conceded to centre forwards. Both of those two teams are actually quite lowly ranking in that regard. So Welbeck would be a good option if I felt he started both matches. But I'm more confident on Calvert-Lewin doing that. I think with Welbeck, it's much more likely that he gets maybe 80 to 90 in one and maybe 30 minutes in the other one. Can he do something in 30 minutes? Absolutely. But I think 180 minutes of a striker on penalties versus 120 minutes of a striker on penalties, I think for me, that is what's tipping Calvert-Lewin over the edge. That and the fact that if I did have Welbeck, I'd have to move someone else around, whether that's Verbruggen, Van Heck or Gross. One of them would have to go to put in Welbeck. And if I wanted another Leeds pick, for example, there's not a Leeds midfielder that I want anymore with Stack out for a little while. I don't want to triple up on the Leeds defence for sure. So it makes it quite hard unless I go with Sarr or Jadon Anthony in that midfield role instead of Gross. But I think the combination of Gross and Calvert-Lewin is slightly stronger anyway. So that's what I'm currently on. However, like I mentioned, it's boring, isn't it? It's just boring. There are so many picks here that just feel like wallpaper picks. I'm hoping that being on Wildcard is enough of a differential in itself that having this combination of players is going to be effective. But I think it's worth having a look at different ways we can structure this. So let's move on to why I've wildcarded first, maybe briefly, and compare it to the other strategy I was looking at. And then we'll wrap up with a few different structural changes that you could make to this team to make it a little bit more exciting if possible. Right, so moving over to my planning tool, that is Solio. Do make sure you go check that out if you get the chance. I've left the link below. Free to give it a go, and I'm not sponsored by them. I just really enjoy using them. So yeah, do go check them out. I've mapped out a few different routes that I am considering. The top 3 that you can see, and the top one split into 2, so it's 3 overall, are both wildcards. So the top one, I can't remember which one it is. I think maybe it's the very top line here is the wildcard strategy I'm currently on, with Gabriel included. And that would take me all the way to the end of the season with a spare transfer currently in the bank, which I think will be really, really useful because something inevitably will go wrong and I want to use that transfer somewhere. So I think that's quite helpful to have that banked. If I wanted to start with Gabriel, move it to Senesi next week, that would gain me a lot of points on the bench boost, as you can see. So this little column highlighted here. And then as you move across, I'd be bringing back Gabriel in game week 35, again, for Senesi, which sounds really good. That's a really good strategy in my mind. But the problem there is, if anything goes wrong, then it will be a hit to solve it. And in 7 game weeks time, across there at some point, I think there will be something that goes wrong. It's impossible to predict what, but having that spare transfer is going to be potentially quite useful. Then we've got this wildcard draft down here, which is actually starting with Senesi instead of Gabriel. So I don't have to do the in-out. I can just do the swapping Senesi out come game week 35. So starting with Senesi means that I'm slightly weaker in game week 32. Hill is currently starting. It could be Strauch, it could be Senesi, but basically it's a player with a poor fixture instead of Gabriel at home to Bournemouth. So a little bit worse off there. But then without having to make a transfer, I'm in the ideal situation for Bench Boost 33 with 14 doublers, that double Bournemouth defence, both predicted to do pretty well with Newcastle and Leeds in the double. And then I can just use that 1 free transfer in game week 35 to remove Senesi for Gabriel at that point. Now, this does give me a little bit more wiggle room because I will have a transfer spare in theory. But again, it's not going to take much to go wrong for that to then be an issue. And then I'm also compromising in game week 32 itself as well. I'm 2 points down projected anyway by not having Gabriel in this team. So I think I would probably simplify it and just start with Gabriel. It's slightly worse on the bench boost, but I catch up later on down the line because Gabriel's already there and I've got a spare transfer as well. The reason I wanted to come onto this section, though, is not for any of those particular points. It's the alternative strategy that I was considering. And you might be sat here thinking, I'm on the fence. I don't know whether I want a wild card this week. I've picked a wild card I quite like, but I also quite like my team this week. So this is the alternative strategy I would be looking at if you've got your wild card, got your free hit, and ideally got your bench boost as well, although it would be perfectly applicable without it too. I would be looking potentially at free hitting in 33 instead if you're set up pretty nicely for 32. Now, my team with 1 free transfer would have been to probably sell Ekatike for Bowen, and that gives me a good team for game week 32 with that 1 free transfer. But crucially, it's not a lot better than my wildcard team. If you look at the projected points, again, it's just a bit of a finger in the sky, as you will, like test the wind. 56.8 versus 56.2. I'm losing 0.6 on the projection. It's not that bad. So this would be my team. Bowen in. You've got Fernandes, the best captain. I won't go through the whole team. You can see it on screen there. But have a look at yours. And if you're more confident on your team this week than I was, then maybe wildcarding this week just isn't the best choice for you. You could free hit in game week 33, which, there we go, it's loading up. Thank you. So free hit 33 looks really good. You can get the exact 11 doublers that you want. No, you will be not bench boosting that week, unfortunately, and that will set you behind the bench boosters quite significantly, which won't feel good. If a free hit gets you a red arrow, that's not a good feeling. But it will shield you in game week 33. You might already be pretty well set up in 34 because a lot of the good players in 32 are also pretty handy in 34. And then you could wildcard in 35. Now, this is just a sort of a quickly picked wildcard team in game week 35, but it is at this point where you would gain the benefit and regain the points lost by not wildcarding earlier, because wildcard itself looks pretty good. You can get to triple Arsenal, you can get Gordon, you can get the Man City players that you feel are best, you can get to triple Crystal Palace as well, ahead of their double game week in 36, potentially. It's not confirmed yet, but they will probably have a double. But it allows you to make all of those changes, go full steam ahead into bench boosting in game week 36 with triple Palace, triple City, and a good looking team outside of that. And then you're also slightly better set up for the remaining couple of game weeks as well. So I do like that plan. The things that made me nervous and the reasons that I chose to wildcard this week instead were, I didn't love the look of my team this week anyway. It was okay, but I think it wasn't standout good. Definitely not good enough for me to not press the button. But then also, when we get to later on in the season, things like rotation, players and teams on the beach, we get to game week 36, there might be a random injury or a random rest for some of the single game weekers in this pack, which makes the bench boost really, really weak and puts you on the back foot immediately. Now, at least with game week 33, because most of them double, unless there's an injury that happens before the deadline, they're very likely to get at least one game. So it's not ideal. But I think that's that second scenario that I talked about there, free hitting in 33, wildcarding in 35 into the bench boost 36, is another one that I would strongly recommend you look at for your team, because it might suit you better than wildcarding now if you're well set up for the game week ahead. Okay, so if you're with me so far, you've reached the point in the video where we're going to test out a few different combinations and try and intentionally differentiate this wildcard draft to see if there's a combination that might land better with you, and maybe some differential picks in there as well that you haven't yet considered that might be interesting. Now, word of warning, I haven't planned this section whatsoever, so there's no particular structure to it. Might get a little bit rambly, but hopefully you follow along with me and maybe we'll find something together that will be interesting. So this is the wildcard draft I presented in the video earlier. I think the first thing I'd maybe consider looking at is trying to stockpile a team into either a defense or a midfield attack. So you're going all guns blazing on one side of them. So for example, rather than having Gross in there, you could maybe go, let's say Anthony. I kept mentioning him. I've got a bit of a gut feeling he could do all right next couple of game weeks. It's not a nice double with Nottingham Forest and Man City, but you never know. So if Anthony's in there instead, then immediately that frees you up to go triple Brighton defence, for instance. And actually, if you went, instead of Strauch, you could go, is it Kadioglu is 4.4? Yeah. So you could go Kadioglu. That gives you a slightly better looking defence this week because you've got the triple Brighton away at Burnley. Now, can we guarantee they'll keep a clean sheet in that game? No, unfortunately not. And that is a risk. But if you're looking at maybe maximizing the variance that you can give yourself for the biggest possible chance of gaining a lot of points. You could also lose a lot of points, but if you're really chasing, then you might want to do something a little bit different like this to hope for one scenario to come true, i.e. Brighton to keep a couple of clean sheets in the next few game weeks, and then all of a sudden you've got more of that Brighton defence than anyone else. So Anthony is one I put in there, and unfortunately I don't have the team value for it, but I know a lot of people do. You could look at maybe instead of taking out Strauch, you could look at taking out O'Reilly and putting Cherky in the Man City midfield and tripling up on Man City attack. And then immediately we've changed what, like 2 players there, and all of a sudden you've got 2 massive swords even, to go on the attack against other managers, because very few are going to have triple Brighton defence, very few are going to have triple Man City attack. Yes, it's risky, but there's almost no such thing as free risk in this game. You've got to take a chance somewhere if you want to gain quickly. So this would be where the risk might take me as an example. So we're already here. We're already in a little bit of a mess. So let's reset this. I've already gone all the way back. Let's load up. This is really good viewing, by the way. I do apologize for this. I did warn you it would be rambly. Here we are. So back to this point where we've got the wildcard I showed you earlier. Now, one thing you might want to look at doing is, like I mentioned earlier, instead of Calvert-Lewin, you could go with Welbeck. And then, okay, you've got too much Brighton. Maybe you're not too bullish on the Brighton defence. You could look at, instead of Verbruggen and Van Heck, just maybe doing one of them and maybe putting in someone like Dubravka instead and going with the 2 cheapies in goal. That's possible. Now you've got double Brighton attack. That could be interesting to you. I don't love Dubravka with Darlow. You might have more money in the bank. You could go with Petrovic, for example, instead. Now, unfortunately, he's not got a great fixture this week, but maybe you want to start Darlow instead. Basically, there are different combinations you can look at that might be interesting here. And then the other one, I'll have to reset it yet again. The other one I'd be looking at is probably trying to stockpile Chelsea a little bit. Now, Palmer and João Pedro do feel almost like wallpaper picks, a little bit boring. And I don't actually have a third Chelsea pick here. I'm not personally bullish on the Chelsea defence. I think Cucurella is the pick if there is one, but I'm not loving it. But if you did fancy tripling up on Chelsea and moving away from the defence, then Palmer and Pedro alongside, I don't know, maybe someone like Esteval, if you think that he's going to get a run of games, could be really interesting. And he has got great underlying attacking data. Chelsea fans are absolutely clamouring for him to come into the starting lineup. It's risky, but it could work. Then you've got someone a bit safer. I say safer, he's suspended for this week. But if you rejig everything slightly, you can maybe bench Enzo Fernandez. Right now I've got Tav there. That could easily be someone different. But away at Arsenal, he could get something. And then next week, if you fast forward it, you've got Enzo, you've got that triple Chelsea attack as well. So you could look at doing something like that. What else can you do? You could look at maybe, if you've got a few transfers in the bank, instead of starting with João Pedro or Calvert-Lewin, you could look at starting with Bowen this week in game week 32. Much better fixture, Wolves at home. And then you can make that transfer next week to João Pedro instead. Now, I'm not doing that because I've only got 1 free transfer and I need that for later on down the line. But if you've got 3, 4 or 5 free transfers into the wildcard, you could definitely have a 1-week punt in there. Someone like Bowen would be really, really interesting, or Thiago as well. So I think I'm going to wrap up there because I can feel myself starting to ramble. But all of that to say, if you want to differentiate on a wildcard, I wouldn't necessarily look at changing all of the players. I wouldn't be going without Haaland or João Pedro or Palmer just for the sake of it. What I'd look at doing instead is maybe trying to maximize the combinations of players. So maybe look at triple Brighton defence, maybe double Man City defence instead, maybe triple Man City attack or triple Chelsea attack or triple Brighton attack. Any of those things could be interesting, and very few people are going to maximise the upside by putting all of their eggs in one basket at a time. What I've done is quite balanced, but it's less likely to score big in any one particular arena. Whereas, yeah, if you wanted to really chase the pack and do something different, then I'd focus on trying to find combinations that you'd willingly bet on, like triple Man City attack, for instance, for the next few game weeks, and hope that they outperform expectations. Anyway, as we reach the end of today's video, hopefully you've enjoyed the little bit of a ramble at the end there. And if you did enjoy today's video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like, hit subscribe if you're new around here, and let me know what is your favourite wildcard differential that I haven't mentioned today. Drop it in the comments below and let's have a chat about it. And it might be quite good inspiration for me ahead of locking in.